Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of the Lime Lady, as she was dubbed. Now, she actually lost her identity for 40 years until she finally got her name back. She was a Jane Doe for such a long time, and these kinds of cases can be really frustrating because just like the Angel of the Meadow that I covered a while ago, she is still a Jane Doe. We have no idea who she is, so her family could have been out there looking for her. And they just don't know. And the thing is, with this one, the circumstances surrounding it are so sad because of how it all went down as to how they never found her identity. You will find out as we go through it. You'll see what I mean. But, you know, the family that's left behind is just out there wondering as to what happened to their loved one. And they may never find out because this person who they have under as a Jane or John Doe didn't have any ID on them. Nobody's ever claimed them. And it's just really sad. Sometimes we do find out who these people are, but unfortunately that's not always the case. I mean, it's getting more and more often now. With the improved DNA technology that we have these days, there are actually more and more John and Jane Does being given back their names. But obviously it's not always the case. This case was suggested by Patrick, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. And of course, if you do have any more, please do let me know. My list is very long. I should really go in order of as they are requested, like date order, but at the minute they're just a hue and mush. And I just go through and just pick something from them. I try to pick off different people. I don't just pick always off the same people. But some cases I may have had for a very long time, so just if you want to see those more than others, just give me a sort of reminder kind of thing, because I will get through them eventually, but I've got a very long list. So yeah, let's just get into the case. On the 18th of April in 1980, a group of fishermen went and parked at the end of Britain Road, and they get out of the car and head towards the North Canadian River. And this is where they came across the grim discovery. They came across a young woman. She was unidentified, as you well know. She had no ID on her, nothing on her, literally anything that could be an identifying sort of piece of document or anything like that. There was nothing on her. What is known is that she was found close to the town of James in Oklahoma. Jones, not James, my apologies. It was discovered that her body had been there around about 10 days at that point. She was white, young female between the ages of 18 to 25, around about 5'6" to 5'7" tall, between 118 and 120 pounds. They estimated that she either had shoulder length blonde, like light blondie, light browny hair, or like a reddish brown to a light brown kind of coloured hair. They also found that she had an appendectomy scar, so she'd had her appendix taken out. She had quite a lot of dental work having been performed, but she still had some crooked teeth as well. She had a tattoo above her left breast, and they were really hoping that this would be like an identifying factor and that somebody would claim her from that. It was a red heart that was outlined in blue. So obviously not many people would have that, especially not in that location, so they were really hoping that it would, you know, they would get something off that. This woman had been shot 3 times in the chest and been dumped in the brush. You know, they managed to get the caliber of the gun. It was a .45 caliber gun. And the police knew that this was like a favourite among local biker gangs at the time, and there was actually a biker bar close by. But apart from that, they didn't have anything else to go on to point to like a suspect. She was actually found naked, and they found this dime embedded in her skin. Now, what they believed, it also had clothing fibres on it around it too. What they actually believed was one of the bullets hit this dime that was in her pocket, which embedded it into her skin, and that meant that she had been shot while she was clothed. It was estimated that the shooter was facing the victim and walked towards her as they fired. Now, where does the Lime Lady come from, you may ask? She actually got that nickname because whoever had done this to her had tried to... It's thought that they tried to dissolve her body in lime. Well, not dissolve it, but make the decomposition process happen a lot quicker because that is what she was found covered in. However, it didn't have that effect, if that was the desired effect, because it had the opposite, and it basically mummified her rather than accelerating decomposition. It just, I don't know, preserved her body. The Doe network actually stated that the wrong lime was used, so that has made people believe that, you know, the intention of covering her with lime was to try and aid decomposition, which it does make sense, because I'm not being funny, if you've murdered someone, you're going to want to try and get rid of the evidence as quick as you can. If you think that lime will do the job, if you pour it over the body and it will get rid of it quicker, then they're going to do that, aren't they? But, you know, it had the opposite effect. The victim's face was perfectly preserved as a result of the lime, and it allowed sketch artists to do a composite sketch of her, of what she probably looked like whilst alive. And again, the police really did hope that the sketch, along with the distinctive tattoo that she had, that they would be able to use those to identify her. And you would think that that would be the case. The police tried everything they could think of to try and get who this woman was, but they got nothing. Weeks turned into months, which turned into years, which turned into decades, and they still had no identity for her. They eventually placed the Lime Lady in an unmarked grave in the Oklahoma cemetery. Well, one of the cemeteries, I'm not sure which it was. Obviously, this left her case open to theories over the years, and people were thinking that maybe her family didn't come forward to claim her because she was homeless, you know, or maybe she was a sex worker, maybe she was some sort of exotic dancer, or even a runaway. Like, she could have even lived nowhere near Oklahoma. If she was a runaway and had run from her family, you know, she might not even live in that area. It would have just been so hard to try and find her identity. There was a lot of speculation around the case, and nobody knew whether any of it was, you know, even remotely close to the truth, like at all. You know, as with many cold cases, the years go by, they kind of do get sort of put away, put on the back burner, closed, if you like. And that's what happened to the Lime Lady. You know, they had no leads, they had no information, no one came forward for her. So they did eventually close the case, but they reopened it in 2013. At the time, it was Oklahoma's oldest unsolved case, and obviously everyone wanted that to change. Everyone wanted it to be solved, everyone wanted to find out who this was, especially the police. Now, as a result of her body being perfectly preserved, they were able in 2014 to make a DNA profile of her, and at that point she'd actually been deceased for 34 years. So 34 years after her death, she was still pretty well preserved, and they did a DNA profile on her. I find that just insane. Law enforcement agencies around the world use the hashtag POLTWT in an attempt to reach and have information on this case. Now, I might be wrong here, but I believe it stands for Police Tweetathon. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. And it's supposed to connect communities and police all over. And obviously, it's an attempt to try and spread the word even further. Then, in late 2018, the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Office obtained a blood and oral swab with the Lime Lady's DNA on it. They went ahead and sent this DNA to the Doe Project. And if you haven't heard of the Doe Project before, you may be wondering who they are. Well, I haven't actually talked about them before. You know, I've not come across them in my cases before, like for you guys, but it's an organization that uses genetic genealogy to help try and identify John and Jane Does. They're a non-profit organization. It's such a great cause and a great thing that they are doing. They have been vital and integral in finding out the identity of many Jane and John Does over the years, including the Lime Lady. On the 30th of October in 2019, Captain Bob Green got a call to say that they had a profile that nearly exactly matched the Lime Lady's, and they were sending it to their genealogist. Of course, it wasn't a 100% match, but it was pretty damn close. Her DNA was uploaded to GEDmatch, and the Doe Project found a suitable candidate within a day and a half. So that's just how amazing it is and how quick it can happen. After all that time, after 40 years, it's happened so quickly. It's so strange. Now, this match was almost certainly the identity of the Lime Lady. By this point, they knew that she had been in the military, so they got military records and they sent those to the orthodontist. It was through those records that a positive identification was finally made. On Christmas Eve of 2019, Captain Bob Green got another call. And it was very much said everywhere that I have read that this was an early Christmas present for him. So obviously he was very invested in this case, very invested in finding out who the Lime Lady was, to the point where it was an early Christmas present for him. They officially had an identification for the Lime Lady, and it was Tamara Lee Tidgard. Now, I just want to say, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the surname. I've seen it both ways, Tidgard. I am so sorry that I don't know which one it is, or it might be neither of them and pronounced totally different. But Tidgard sounds more naturally as to how I read it initially, and how I've heard it more often, so that's how I'm gonna obviously pronounce her name. If you know how it was pronounced, for certain, then please do let me know in the comments below. So now that we finally have an identification for the Lime Lady, let me tell you a little bit about her. Tamara Lee Tidgard was born on the 18th of April in 1959. She was originally from California but was living in Las Vegas, Nevada at the time of her disappearance. She was 20 years old. In March of 1980, Tamara was last seen out for a walk close to her home in Las Vegas, and she just never came home. She was reported missing a month later. It's not known how long she was in Oklahoma or exactly what happened between the days or even weeks between her going missing and her body being found, but her body was found on what would have been her 21st birthday, which means she never got to see her 21st birthday, which is just so sad. Now, how I said the circumstances about her going missing and what happened around it as to why she wasn't identified for so long. What actually happened was her family reported her as missing, and a woman in Iowa actually stole her identity. So it is believed that her missing persons case was thought as resolved because this woman out there had randomly stole her identity. She said that she never knew who Tamara was. It was just like a random coincidence thing, I guess, but she stole her identity and was out there gallivanting around pretending to be Tamara, and therefore police just figured that she was a runaway. She was safe and sound because she was out there using a credit card, using a social security number, whatever, but she actually wasn't. And that is so sad because she was the Lime Lady and they just never knew because her missing persons case was closed and thought resolved when it actually wasn't. It was fully cleared from the record, and that explains why she went unidentified for so long. Again, it's just so sad because if they would have had that missing persons report, they might have actually gained a positive identification sooner, and her family could have been informed that, well, I know that nobody wants to find out that, their daughter or sister or whatever is deceased, but when you're living in that limbo of not knowing what happened, at least you then know for certain. Do you know what I mean? But they didn't identify her, and that was never possible for her family. As I mentioned before, they found out that Tamara was in the military. She was actually a veteran. She had served in the US Army, and then it was discovered that all of her immediate family, both her parents and her siblings were already deceased by the time that Tamara was identified. Her parents had actually passed away in the 2000s, and her sister passed away in 2010, and it would be 9 years after that when her identity was discovered. So they passed away without ever knowing what happened to their sister and daughter, and that is it's just fully heartbreaking to me. Police also have no idea how Tamara got to Oklahoma. Again, she lived in Las Vegas. What was she doing there? They don't know how long she was there for before she was murdered. They just have no idea. So although we now have her identity, there are still so many questions in this case. But now that Tamara's identity was discovered, they gave her a military funeral with full military honors. So she was no longer in an unmarked grave in an Oklahoma cemetery. She had the full military honor funeral, which it's lovely. That is really nice. So the investigation into finding Tamara's killer is still ongoing. In a January press conference, Captain Bob stated that he actually had a few people to speak to. So whether there were a few suspects in the case, I've tried looking up more information on this. I can't find it as of yet, so nothing. Well, they haven't released anything if anything has come of that. He was asked about the woman in Oklahoma who had stolen Tamara's identity, and he stated that, like I've already said, she didn't actually know who Tamara was and that she isn't considered a suspect. So you may think that, you know, maybe she was the one that killed Tamara and then ran off with her identity, but that it's not believed to be the case. So Tamara's case went from a murdered Jane Doe, known as the Lime Lady, who, of course, they wanted to find the murderer, but more importantly, they wanted to find her identity initially so that they could look more into people who may have been close to her. You know, you sometimes, when you have their identity, you could get information as to maybe who did this to her. But it went from trying to find her identity to now finding her identity and trying to find her killer. So they still don't know who murdered her. This case is still ongoing. Unfortunately, her family has since passed, and obviously that means that maybe the killer has too. Not necessarily the case, but obviously she went unknown for 40 years. She was 20 at the time, so it's like a 60-year-old case, more than. And who knows, if the person that did this to her was 20, 40 years old, who knows? They could also be deceased at this point. I'm not saying that they are, because they might not be, but it's a possibility. Honestly, after so many years of being unidentified and then finally getting a name back and being honoured in the military with a lovely burial, I truly hope that we do find her murderer. It would finally put her case to rest, finally. Obviously not her family, because her family's no longer here, unfortunately, but it's just the last thing that we can do for Tamara to solve her murder, and I honestly hope that it does get solved. But for now, the Lime Lady, Tamara Tidgard's case, her case remains unsolved. So yeah, that is the end of the case. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of the Lime Lady, who we now know is Tamara Tidgard. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!